Well, howdy ho there, folks. How are we doing today? Hopefully you're all doing absolutely peachy keen fantastic, full of love and goodness for the Lord and other reasons. Why not? Today I was going to talk a little bit about Horus Lupercal, and I had this spooky music that I put on in the background. It's from Prometheus Studio. I'll put a link down below so you can go click on it if you want to. And, well, let me just tell you, I've been thinking about Horus Lupercal lately and whether or not he is justified in abandoning the Imperium and, you know, starting the Horus Heresy. And I thought it was kind of interesting to think about this because, you know, this does involve doing a lot of research into Horus himself and why exactly he ends up betraying the Imperium. Now, there's actually a decent number of reasons that he ends up going against the Imperium, but one of the main ones that we really kind of see before it even, like, all happens is that Horus kind of gets the impression that the Emperor is not doing as great or doing things for the pure benefit of the Imperium before he ever really even starts to turn. You can kind of see it in the first few books of the Horus Heresy that Horus really has this personality of kind of almost like needing to please, but also needing to be like seen as magnanimous, being able to be seen as like this glorious leader, being able to be seen as someone who is, you know, beyond others. Horus has this innate desire to demonstrate his sort of superiority over others, and he also has this desire to project an image of himself out to those around him. He has his Mournival be the ones to like actually chastise people and tell them that they're doing something wrong rather than himself being the one to do it. Horus has this need to be seen as the glorious son, and it's very interesting to see that that's kind of like a very important part of his character. And he sees that the Imperium is not living up to his own standards, and that's actually one of the big reasons that he ends up thinking about rebelling, which is kind of interesting. And see, part of the reason that's important is because what we see as we go through and explore Horus is that he clearly has doubts before everything happens. You see that he thinks that they're handing the Imperium over to bureaucrats, but you also see that he's cracking under the pressure that he puts upon himself to try and live up to the standards he believes that his father has set out for him. He believes that he is the chosen son for a reason, and that he is ultimately the one who is, you know, most qualified to lead. You also see this a little bit in that there are so many people. For instance, in the Alfarius book, you see that the other Primarchs have their own opinions about who should lead, and Primarchs tend to have this natural sense of feeling like they're, I almost want to say arrogance is a good way to put it. You definitely get that sense of arrogance in certain people like Fulgrim, but you also get it in like the Alfarius book. We get a little preview with the Lion, where we see that the Lion definitely seems to have ideas about who should lead and who shouldn't. He doesn't possess that humble of a character. And Horus is definitely like that. Horus is not a humble character. He likes to pretend like he is. He likes to give people the image that he is. But he ultimately is not. So one reason is that Horus is trying to live up to his own standards and feels like the Imperium is not living to the standards that he and his father have set. And he begins to see his father as a sort of hypocrite for not living up to those standards. But then there's also the fact that if you look around at the Imperium, you can clearly see that it's not what it's meant to be. If you read Nemesis and some of the other books, you get this impression that the Imperium is actually like full of not just slavery as we know it is, but also like this kind of rot and this kind of criminal underbelly even from the beginning. And I'm pretty sure it's Nemesis, we see like in the shadow of the Imperial Palace, there are people who are struggling to live, whose lives are mostly run by gangs, and who are like in this state of extreme poverty, while the Emperor is living in, like, you know, basically the lap of luxury and all these other things. Now, you could say that the Emperor uses ideas like luxury and power to reinforce his own power, or like, you know, like image rather than power. He uses image and luxury to project his own power outward. But we can also already see that there is definitely a deep corruption at the heart of the Imperium, and there's not really any escaping that. Part of this is simply due to the nature of mankind. In circles of power, well, what do people want to do except for preserve power? And this often causes people to lose sight of their end goals or lose sight of their principles in favor of something else. There's also the fact that Horus can see that the Emperor is in fact rather inhuman, that this whole enterprise is somewhat inhuman, and that there's a guilt about it. Part of the reason that Horus wants to interact with the Interrex and, you know, talk to them is because he kind of wants to see and kind of wants to know, is the Emperor wrong? Because he does suspect the Emperor is wrong. He suspects that this violence that we meet every challenge with, this destruction that we're wreaking across the stars, is not actually what we should be doing. It's not actually what we need to be doing, and it's not actually, you know, the only solution to these problems that we have. We see that the Interrex are an example of the universe, of this idea in universe that, like, Xenos and, like, various different Xenos species cannot work together because, you know, we're Xenos to, well, I'm definitely Xenos to all you guys because, you know, Space Cat. But, you know, humans are Xenos to other, you know, alien species. And that, you know, they believe that humans are these naturally kind of warlike, monstrous creatures. And there's definitely this idea that Horus wants to see, can you get past that? Can you make it so that you don't have to react to everything with violence and destruction? And there's definitely those signs. And, you know, there's kind of this almost like crushing inner defeat, this like moral defeat when he sees that, like, something has happened that makes it so that they can't. And on some level you see that Horus doesn't necessarily want to live in a galaxy where that's the only solution. We also see that Horus has definitely has the desire to question authority. In one of the short stories, is it Herald of the Emperor? It might be Herald of the Emperor. I'm not sure exactly which one it is. But in one of the short stories, Horus questions Malcador, and he threatens to speak about, you know, the destroyed Primarchs. And Malcador has to, like, you know, use his psychic powers to hurt him and make him stop and all that. But he is already seeing that the Imperium is not just violent towards outsiders, but it's also violent towards insiders. And we can see that if you question authority, you are going to be crushed. Any of the Primarchs know that if you do something, which we don't know exactly what the two lost Primarchs did, but if you do something that the Emperor does not approve of, he will send his executioners to get you. He will destroy you. There's a reason that Russ is called the executioner of the Emperor. And these are there's a lot of different reasons, there's a lot of different questions, and these are kind of in the background. But the main thing that really kind of pushes him over is this suspicion that the Imperium is actually going to be one of the worst things, that his father actually does want to be worshipped, that his father does actually want everyone to be completely obedient to him and nothing else, and that all these high ideals are kind of a facade for what the Emperor really wants, which is to have an Imperium centered around him. And this is why when he's on Davin and he sees these visions, it's so convincing to him, because he already thinks that this is what's going to happen. He already, as he looks and he sees this future, the future of what the Imperium would become, actually because of the Horus Heresy, but one might argue that it may have still become something very similar to this with the Emperor still there. There's definitely this idea that the Imperium is built to basically create worship of the Emperor, and, like, even if it's not literally that, Horus can see where that kind of leads and where all this leads and comes together. And that's definitely worth looking at and worth trying to see whether or not he's justified in believing that. And I will also mention that the Emperor clearly doesn't trust the Primarchs. The Emperor does not tell the Primarchs about his plan. He keeps lots of secrets. He abandons the Crusade. And he throws it over to Horus. And it's not just an honor for Horus, which, you know, you could consider it that. But really what it is I'm done, you mop up. That's what it really is, and Horus sees that. So for these reasons and more, Horus ends up embracing chaos and deciding that the Emperor is one of the worst things for humanity. And on top of all this, he knows that the Emperor has now lied about chaos. As he gets a greater vision of chaos and sees what chaos actually is, he knows that the Emperor has lied about chaos. And there's a couple of thoughts you could have there. For one, if humanity is really damned and there's this afterlife that's going to torture them forever, or if these things are actually out there, simply denying their existence just isn't going to work. I think anyone who thinks about it for like 10 minutes would know that. But denying their existence isn't going to work. But not just that, but that means that there is real threats and real things that are like pulling at the strings of the Imperium and could be trying to invade the Imperium as they speak, and actual demons and all these other things. And the Emperor does just, his only idea is to not tell people about it and to lie. And eventually it's the lie that also, you know, really pulls Horus away from the Emperor. Turns out it doesn't actually take that much to get Horus away from the Emperor, because the more you see of the Imperium, as especially at like the head of the Crusade, the more you see the damage that the Emperor is actually doing to mankind. You see the slavery that the Emperor is placing everyone in. The Emperor is a slave master. And he starts to realize that the only reason he has the privileges he does is because he's going along with the Emperor's plan. If he questions the Emperor too much, if he pushes too much the other way, he knows he'll be crushed. He knows this. You get all these things together, and it becomes evident that the Imperium is more of a blight than anything. And that this glorious vision of the future only extends to certain people. And he also comes to begin to suspect that the Space Marines will live out their service, will live out like their usefulness, or outlive their usefulness, and might just be crushed. Are they creating an Imperium where these guys can actually live and survive and be a part of something greater? Horus doesn't really seem to believe so. So I would say, with all that, Horus is justified in rebelling. Here's the problem. The problem is that Horus ends up using methods to rebel that are basically straight from like literal space hell. Like, by using these methods, Horus is doing something that will drag humanity down. Now, he gets more corrupted as time goes on and embraces chaos more and more. But what he starts to realize is he has to use every tool in his arsenal. And when he starts to embrace this idea of, you know, chaos. And he thinks that he can avoid being a puppet of the gods by controlling them. Of course, that's not at all what's happening, and he's becoming more and more of a puppet all the time. He doesn't really seem to realize it truly, or he thinks that he's above it, but he's not. What Horus ultimately unleashes upon the Imperium is something that the Imperium had, in a sense, built up to regardless of what he did next. The Imperium built itself upon war. The Imperium built itself on strict domination. The Imperium lifted up people like Horus and gave them the idea that there is nothing but domination, that there is nothing but war. After a while, it's kind of like, what else did you actually expect to have happen? And there is some hint throughout the Horus Heresy, if you read a lot of the books, that they wanted them to rebel so that they could, you know, crush them and use, or you know, they had to, were like justified in killing off a bunch of them. There's that idea is definitely there. Whether or not that's, I don't really know if that's ever confirmed canon, because in the End of the Death, Volume 3, the Emperor's like, I actually loved all my sons. Or it's Volume 2. I love my sons. He really clearly didn't love all his sons, but I loved all my sons. And it's like that's a nonsense thing. But was Horus justified? Yes. Although the eventual methods and things he used would definitely cause a darkness to form. But if I'm just going to be honest with you, if the Imperium was allowed to just continue and to continue to work, it would have still enslaved countless trillions of people, countless quadrillions of people. It still would have been a force of ultimate evil within the galaxy. And one of the only reasons it doesn't seem like the force of ultimate evil is because chaos is just that much worse for a lot of reasons. Not necessarily worse in terms of freedom, because the Imperium and chaos operate on many of the same ideas. They operate on many of the same ideas of might makes right and destruction is okay, and killing your enemies is, and like using force to get your goals is fine. That's a lot of what the Imperium is, what the Imperium believes. It's about strength. It's, you know, these ideas of like, it grows into ideas of purity and all these other things, but it is about like this idea of strength and destruction. And that the only thing that's worth preserving is what we decide is worth preserving, what we say, what the Emperor says. And that's kind of the whole problem with the thing. But yeah, I don't know, I was just thinking about that, and I thought it would be fun to make a short little video talking about that. Anyway, thanks so much for stopping by, and I hope that you know that I love you, and God loves you, and bye-bye, I love you, bye. I hope you all have a great one, bye.